Hello, everyone. We're back in the solutions track. And for the next talk, we will have Jean Burellier. Jean will have a talk about automatically securing your APIs thanks to shared security model between business and engineering. So most of the issues are between the business and engineering, and Jean will share that with us, the story about APIs and security from the business and engineering. Hello, Jean. How are you?
Hey, doing great, and you?
I'm doing fine, doing fine. So yeah, you work at Sanofi and you have some great API security story to share. So please share your slides and yeah, let's go for a 45-minute talk.
Great, perfect. I hope you are seeing my slide right now. And
Yes,
if everything
perfect.
good, great, perfect. So we can start. So yeah, like you said, I'm working at Sanofi. I'm working with API. I was working for Allianz before that, so insurance company. And as you can guess, API are really a core system for us. But I would guess it's also the same for every company that now use internet, use just API to, I don't know, build front-end application, mobile application, and pretty much everything. And if you have an issue with your API, that's really a big problem. You can be exposing your user data, you can be exposing confidential data. It's quite an issue, and security is always really hard. We understand that as people doing on a technical field, but you also have to see how you can share every information with the business part and everyone in the company. So we are all working with security, knowingly or not. Like in a day-to-day life, I would guess that we are not crazy. And even when we are not building API, we try and we think about security first. Like when you will maybe tomorrow morning or today when we will take your car and going to work and going to buy some grocery or everything, like I guess you will lock your car. Same for you when you go back home. You will lock your front door, but you will also maybe lock other part. Maybe if you have a fence on or some other part. Like security is something that we try to think of every day, and almost everyone. Like even if just crossing the road, you are checking right, left, maybe right again. So it's really security. We are built into see security, and even if we go back like 10 of thousands of years before that, security was a key of survival. Today, maybe a bit less. Like if you don't lock your phone, it's not really an issue, at least for your survival, but could be quite an issue for maybe your finance or some specific information. And we all do that every day. You don't give your credit card information to everyone. And you also expect, which is something that we don't really think about when we are building API or just even building application as a whole. Security of one application is also subject to how other people are working with security. It's the same if you're living in a building, you expect that your neighborhood or pretty much everyone will close the door when they enter the building to not have people randomly showing in your building and doing God knows what. So security is really a shared mindset and how you can improve your I would say your life with this example, but also your API. Um, if we just focus now a bit more about just the IT and the security, for a lot of company or every time you are building a project, it's always a technical point of view. I would guess that no one really thought about business needing to take care about security issue. It's always, if there is an issue, uh, it's an issue because the tech guys didn't do a great job or forgot to secure something or didn't check any information, or it's everything linked to technical. And when working with API, most of the question would be around, do you protect your API against this kind of attack, like a DDoS attack, some CSRF stuff, or pretty much every keyword we can put here. I won't go through a full OWASP top 10 security issue, but you can guess, and there's a lot of great speakers here that will be talking about it way better than myself. So, but security, how do you protect your API? There's also a part of security that is linked to, do you use up-to-date packages? Are you using, I don't know, a Node.js version which was released like 8 years ago, or are you up to date with the latest version? Are you using the right version of TLS or some other stuff? Also, basically just check if there is some issue with the stack you are using. Are you using a good framework? Are you using an up-to-date framework? Are you just monitoring the life of your code, of your API, of pretty much everything? That's really the main question that we are always asking ourselves: how can we improve the security? So, as thank you. As you know, I'm Jean Burellier. You can find me on Twitter, on GitHub. I love a lot of stuff like community sharing, mentoring. I'm French, also, as you can maybe recognize with my voice and my accent. So, as a French, I love the food. And yes, French food is amazing. And today I'm here really to talk about how can we work business and engineering to try to secure our API. And the best way would be to be able to secure our API as a way that don't even involve a lot of time for everyone, and that could be done automatically. Because with the main point I was raising just before is API is not just a technical subject. It's a subject for the whole company. Like if your API do have issue, maybe okay, maybe it's your fault as a technical as an engineer that you forgot to check your, I don't know, SQL or SQL requests or some other stuff, but it's also a business impact because people will lose confidence in your company or in the solution you develop and you build. If you, I don't know, leak some information from your users, like name, address, credit information, or stuff like that, there is also like some law, especially in in Europe, but also in the US now with GDPR compliance, that could be quite. You can have a big amount of money that is due to people or some other thing like linked to that. So, how can we work together with the business to protect and secure our API in I would guess, an easy way? Another name for this talk could have been API security is a work for all, because I think API help the business is being built by mostly engineering people, but it's still, we are working together. We are working together to provide a new service or a better service to our customer, to the people that use our API. Could be another team in the company, could be external user, could be another company. So that's quite a lot of people in a lot of different areas. Today, I really want to talk about three main points about how we can do that and how we can achieve that. I will be talking about security. So I still have to do a really quick feedback about basic security and mindset, that thing that you should always think about when you are building an API, because it's a core part of building secure API for your company. And if you don't do that, you will have issue, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but maybe in a month or in a year. The second part I really want to talk about, because for me, it's really the key part of how you can work with a business, is really to focus on building your API and having your company focus on API being a core IT principle. So API should come first. It shouldn't be, the idea should come from the business, but the API should come first, and the design of the API should come first before writing just before writing any line of code. And last part, after I'm here to talk about automatic security by default. So how can we use this mindset of working as an API first company? How can we reuse that to be able to provide some kind of automatic security for your API? But also, we could also link that to testing and quality, because for me, security and quality are not opposite. They are working together, and you should work with them to have them in the same idea and way to work. You shouldn't exclude quality, you shouldn't exclude security. You should be able to provide the best of both worlds. So, like I said, basic security mindset. How and what do we want first when we think about security as a whole? And I mean, we are talking about it as I'm an engineer, I'm writing API daily, but I will try, and I want also to emphasize that even if us as engineers, we are expected to learn about the business we are serving and the solution we are building and how it will be encompassed in the whole API or project landscape of the company. I think it's also fair that a business could be your product owner, product manager, really depend on the name. You are giving people in relation with the business, but also shareholder. Um, and these kind of people, they also should know about how an API is working. I won't ask them, of course, to write a full API and to do to be able to write a Node.js API, REST API, GraphQL API, gRPC, or some other stuff. But I think it's also interesting to know how your technology, or at least how your customer will be served and what the limitation of your API could be about security and quality, like I said a bit before. So when we're talking about API, I think the top four main topic, or at least first topic we want to speak about when talking about security is what's the basic of security. First, please use encryption and signature on every request. So TLS, please you can have an HTTPS on every website freely now. So please do that. It seems really basic, but still a lot of people are not using HTTPS by default on some, maybe a lot of projects. So it would be amazing that at the end of the year, everyone is using HTTPS, and up-to-date version of it would be even better. The second part is a use token. Why token? Because API, if they are available on the World Wide Web for all to use, you should monitor and you should know who did some action, who did some, I don't know, insert some new information in your database, or maybe read some information. So for almost all, but I will say most API, you should use a token. This token will also be used for you to be protected with quota and throttling. You don't want someone to request, I don't know, 1 million requests per second for 10 minutes. It could be a cost part, but it also like the quality of your service won't be as good as if someone was trying to use your API properly, I would say. And last point that a lot of people forget most of the time, please, if there's one thing that you should, at least one thing for now that you should remember at the end of the presentation is please do not expose your API directly. Please do not expose your Node.js, your C#, PHP, I don't know, any language. Do not expose your API directly. That's always a big issue, and we'll discuss why a bit later. Second part, and I know someone else is talking on, or already talked, or maybe we'll be talking a bit later about OWASP top 10, which is basically the biggest vulnerability that people see on the most used website, API, and stuff like that. This is just a quick comparison between 2017 and 2021/2022. We can see that a lot of information or issue, at least, and security issue when handling API is really linked to first, I would say, broken access control and broken authentication. So, which means, like I said just before, use a token and you should know how to use them to validate every request that go through your API before querying, I don't know, a database, another service, for example. And the second part, if we also check some other information, like in 2017, I will use this one as a reference, but 2021 is the same, like injection, for example, could be like, if I mix between both, so both the injection part, but also cross-site scripting, or some basically the data that is sent to your API, monitoring the data and being able to check the data that it's incoming in your service. For me, that's two parts of security that you can save and you can protect quite easily. If it's an easy way to handle security, if at least you are able to be almost certain that you don't have any issue with the authentication of your API, and you don't have issue with the data that is being sent by some customer, some client of your API. If you can remove that from your head and be sure that you won't have any issue, I can guarantee you it's a good way to start the day. One part, and that I'm talking about experience, I worked in insurance, in healthcare, I worked also in finance. Security in most of the case, and a lot of company is always the, I would say, lost child or last child, maybe also, of a project. Like everyone expects to have a great security mindset and a great security rule across the whole company. But most of the time, you don't have time, you don't have money, you don't have people being skilled in security, you don't have a red team or a blue team trying to see or what the quality of the API and the security issues and stuff like that. So if you can push something, that would be great. Try first, do not rely on luck for security. Because if you try with that, 100% of the time you will lose. Maybe not today, but one day you will you will lose everything. Um, and if you don't have any monitoring, any information, or any people that check the security of your API, just you can almost as a guess, you can almost be sure that someone already broke into your system, maybe was able to access some confidential information from your user or something like that. Just as a small information, if you create an API and if you expose it publicly, it could be on AWS, on Google, on pretty much everything. If you build a web, just if you have a bare metal server and even don't have an HTTP server, but just an SSH being open or something like that, you can expect to have people maybe not attacking your service, but at least starting to query your service, maybe to check which ports are open on your server, or trying multiple requests or access some basic pages on your API. If you build, I don't know, for example, if you use or build a WordPress website, in less than 10 minutes, to be honest, you will have some people trying to access the WP-admin pages. If you forgot to remove it, maybe people will be able to access it. And if you didn't change the default password, they will be able to access your website or some other confidential information, or at least things you don't want external people to access. So be careful with security. It's really something that it's quite easy. You have people just scanning everything that is live on the web, on internet. So for me, if I'm talking just basic security mindset, just as a placeholder here, first, we talk about the main part. Some of the part also that could be really interesting. So leverage, I talk about token and authentication. That's great. But on most of the company, just authentifying someone is not enough. Like I could be querying, I don't know, a Facebook API or some other API that a company allow me to do. Maybe I did create an account. Maybe I'm paying for a certain number of requests. But the other part of the authentication is the authorization. Am I allowed to do this request, even if normally I shouldn't be able to access maybe a delete API? If one day I'm able to find the endpoint, can I do a request and delete an information? So you have to think about authentication is really knowing who you are, and authorization is knowing what you are able to do. And you should try to balance both and use both in all your projects. If not, someone will be able to maybe delete some information in your database or some other stuff like that. So it could be quite an issue, and a lot of companies do not think about it. But when you try and when you start to release API into the world with external customer, it's not the same as having everyone internally using your API. And even internally, as an employee, should I be able to delete someone else from, I don't know, an Azure directory database or some contract database information or something like that? I think I should not if I'm not allowed to. So you have to think about that also. Yeah, it's in the main part. I don't want to go through every point, but that's the main subject and topic about basic security. Now, let's start something a bit more interesting. Like I talked a bit earlier about API first as a core IT principle. For me, API should be, and I really want to emphasize that, like API should be the core of your IT system in a company. You can be building front-end application, you can be building mobile application, or pretty much what you want. Every information that is flowing from a database to a user-oriented device will go through an API. So API should be well done, should be, of course, secure, but you also should try to standardize API. Like, for example, if you're working in a company that, I don't know, everyone, I think, have an API that allows you to query user information. But maybe you will use this user object in multiple API elsewhere. Maybe you want to know who did a specific action, who did, I don't know, who bought a new car, or some other thing. But you want to have the same object, the same user object that is being returned every time. So how can we do that? My answer would be by using an API first methodology. But what's API first? So first, it's to think that API are treated as first-class citizens. So when you are building a project, when you are building something, you will check first, do I have every API that I need? Do I, if not, if yes, that's great. We can use it directly. We already have a contract API and every information that we need. If not, what's API are needed to be able to build a new project? And also, with this thinking, this way to think as an API first, you want to have consistent and reusable API. Like you want to use maybe one way to authenticate your user. You maybe want one way to send email or SMS notification, or just basic normal notification on a smartphone. You don't need every team. If you have 10, 20, 30, I don't know, teams, maybe 500 people, engineer or more. You don't want each team to reinvent the wheel every time. You want a consistent and reusable set of API that can be reused by everyone. But also, if people reuse some information from another API, you want to have the same way to display and to return the same information. And for that, you will just basically need to establish a contract for how the API is supposed to behave. Like, if I'm sending back a user information, it should be the same across every API. You shouldn't have, I don't know, somewhere a field called phone number, in another API called phone, in a third one called just number. It's not easy for people, for the developer experience, and it's even worse if you provide your API externally to some other developer or company to use them. Try to think about developer experience. And of course, it involves spending more time thinking about the design of your API. You cannot go directly like, I want to write my code, I want to create an API. And it involves having a way to plan creating new API and how to collaborate with stakeholder. And that's where I think for me, it become really, really interesting. Like API, like you all know, are both used by human, I would say in a website, smartphone, but also by other parts, server, machine, or pretty much everything. Another API can query your first API. Nothing really special here. But API really, for me, which is really important when we're talking about an organization, following an API first strategy is really to build, to develop, and to maintain efficiently for everything. You should have a way to be sure and to ensure that everyone is using the same version of the API, at least the latest, if it's possible, and if you have multiple versions. And one of the big, I think, big benefit, you have multiple one, and most of them would be related to quality and security. So for parallel development, it allows you just create a basic JSON or schema of your API. And every team will be able to have a mock of the said API without even having to build it. Standardization also, that's a really, really core and important place. And I think I already talked a bit about it. And also a better developer experience. One point I didn't talk really here on this slide is it also improves your security, because if you know how one object should work, you can define objects across your whole ecosystem inside your full organization, and to be sure that you are creating the same object, reusing the same object with the same information. And for that, something that is quite, I don't want to say magic, but I think most of you are aware of Swagger or maybe OpenAPI. Which allow you just to define an API using YAML or JSON type of file. And this is where it starts to be really interesting, because when you design your API with this mindset, it allows you to just focus on what's your endpoint, what the input information, what should be the possible output of your API. And with that, you can define and check the security of your application. So if I just want to display a quick example of where is my, let's just check a basic editor Swagger. Yep. This is how it's done. Like it's a YAML file designing just a small API. It's a basic stuff like editor.swagger.io. I think maybe you already know it, but it allows you to easily describe your multiple endpoints in your project. Like if I want to put a basic information, like I do have an endpoint, a /pet endpoint, defined with a put HTTP method. I do have some information, description, and stuff like that. And I'm also able to define a request body. So what should be the content of this object that will be sent in my body when I do a query, a request. I know it should be a JSON application sending an object called a pet object, which is defined a bit lower. I also do have an application XML, so it also handle XML. It also handle XWWW from URL encoded. So I do have multiple way, and it allows me also to give, okay, this content is required. So that means that even without developing something or writing some code, and YAML is quite easy, even if if you don't have like 10 years of experience while writing a Node.js API or just an API. Even someone from a business is able to understand some specific keyword to define an API that way. Like, what's my available response? I do have a 200. It's a successful operation, and it should send back an object, a pet object. Or maybe my API, I will have some issue. Maybe it will send me back a 400 if I do have an invalid ID being supplied, a 404 if the pet is not found, a 405 if there's a validation exception, or sorry, or something like that. But I can also focus on what's the security or what's the permission that could be needed to access my API or to use at least this specific endpoint of my API. And if you go through this one, we have multiple examples with the same pet object. We can also add require information or just define in a specific variable what should be the available information. Like if I want to go on, I think it's on the bottom part, with my pet object. Let me find. Okay, not using a pet object. It should be address, schema order. So let's say we do have an order object here. Would be the same with a pet or some other theme. Like the order object should have an ID, which is a type integer with a specific format. We do have an example here of a value, and we can define every information that we expect to have in our object. Is it required? Is it a string? Is it a number? Is it something more specific, like a regular expression? Should it be like an enumeration, a Boolean, or some other stuff? So it allows you to redefine your object for your users, or at least the contract of your API. And now I'm jumping to the really interesting part. You have to think that for me, when you are working now, I'm on every company I'm working with, and now I'm working with Sanofi, I'm pushing to be API first. Why? First, because it's way easier for everyone to understand which API are being used, what's the contract to use them, and it could be shared across multiple teams, even across people like in multiple countries working on different projects or even on the same project. It's like using a Stripe API or any other kind of publicly available API. You want a full documentation of what's possible, how it's possible, and what could be the end result of an action of a request you do. That's great. With that, you know how to use an API, but maybe we can do a bit more than that. Maybe as developer, we can also reuse this code that we define, our Swagger code, which give us almost all information that are needed to access and to do some query, some HTTP call to just the definition of our contract. How can we use that to improve the security once this contract is being defined, is already defined? And also, I want you to think about defining this contract. As I said, it's not really hard. It's just some keyword that people should be able to work with. Um, Today, and even before when I was working for Allianz, another company, and today at Sanofi, I'm really pushing product owner, or let's say non-technical people, to learn basically how to write, even if they need help at first. But I want to mentor them, and I push every team to do the same, to ensure that the business is able to understand the basic of REST API. And also, I push them if they want a new API to work with, I don't know, a tech lead, maybe a developer, a senior developer for the team, or someone, just to work and to design the API first, always. That way, it also helps people to, and the business part, to give, or at least it's a framework for them to give you more information. Because tomorrow, if I change, I go to another company and I'm expecting to have, I don't know, if I have to query a user API and it send me back, I don't know, a phone number, without checking the documentation or without internal knowledge of how the API is working and how it was implemented across the organization, I don't know what will be the format of my phone number. Is it just a French phone number starting with 0? Am I starting with a plus and with a regional indicative, like +1 or +33? Do I use dot every 2 words? Do I use the French way to write a phone number, or the US way with 3 number dash 3 number dash 4 numbers? How can I know as an engineer, as a developer, which one is the best way for people to use that? And that way we have people also from the business part involved in building the API, and it's not just I have a shiny front-end application, a shiny mobile application, or some visual information. It's a way to involve your business counterpart to work with you on API, and thus improving the global quality and so the security of your API. So how can we do that more automatically once we do have a good standardization, a good contract for API? So first thing you have to think about is we do have everything we want with our API. We have endpoint, we have path, we have query parameter, we can define header, body, pretty much everything. So we know everything. We also know and push people to try to see what will be the specific case in which it's not answering you back a 200, so a successful operation, but something else. How your API can crash? What would be, is it a 404? Could it be a validation error, maybe 405 or 400? Is your server could crash, maybe a 500 or something like that? But you also know what's the content of your request and what's the available response, which means mostly if you know what the content of your request, it means that like it means like if you have the content of your request, you can technically filter that. And like I said, also we can use a gateway to not have your full API being publicly available. It could be a proxy. Maybe you are using an Apache or Nginx proxy. It's working fine. But I want to speak a bit more about, like, if you go to cloud and you go to using AWS or Google or some other service like that, they all do have a service called a gateway. For AWS, it's just called API Gateway. And we will use that. I want to show you how you can use that with your information that we define in our contract and how to use that. But first, okay, we have the contract of our API. That's great. That's amazing. What can we do with that to help us developer to work with that? I'm working mostly with JavaScript, Node.js application. And so you can guess, I'm also using TypeScript in my front end, in my backend. I do have a type with my contract is well defined. I have every information of expected information, input information, and output information of my request. So why can't I should be able to use that and reuse that to enforce some typing um, into my project. So it's really well defined with type. So I can easily change that. If you use Node.js or if you use even Java, pretty much every language, to be honest, every language that do support some typing, you could automatically, from your Open API or Swagger definition, you could generate your type. And that's really the best part of the work. Like, even before you start to write your API, you will be able to generate every type that is needed. So that way, first, better developer experience, both on your front end and back end. But you also have every input and output of your API, and every request and response are standardized, which means that if you are using, I will be talking about Node.js, but you could use that with Rust, in Go, in PHP, in every language. If you're able to provide or to automatically generate a type system, so with TypeScript, or if you use another language, could be like the type in Rust or in another technology. You can also use this transformation with a standard tool. So in Node.js, we do have Joy and AGV, which are two tools which allow you to reuse a contract or just basically to define some information about a specific object, not just input and output, but just a specific object. Just here, you do have a small example. Like, we define just an object, and we expect this object to have two keys. One key should be a name. This name should be a string, an alphanumeric string with a min value of 3, with a max value of 30, which is required. And if you think about it, just with this line, and if we compare that to some example with our Swagger implementation, in our Swagger or in our Open API specification, we do provide exactly the same information. What should be the available value, how it should be treated, and pretty much everything. Is it required or not? So it's just a way to convert, and saying you have a lot of tools to do it. You can convert automatically your definition, your API definition, to just a small, I would guess, script or object, depending on how you want to tag that. You are able to say, okay, I have my definition. Now I have a way to dynamically check on every request if my type or if my information are correct. Like in this example, on the second line, you have a Burellier, which is a number, should be an integer, should be 1970 minimal and maximal 2013. Could be 2023. Did a typo writing that one, but I think you can understand. That way you can generate your full security or your full control on every input that is being done by your user. Could also be used to, if you want to check the information coming from an HTTP call that you do from another API. That way you can really be sure and ensure that your security or your project will automatically reject every HTTP call or every request, every information that does not follow or is not typed correctly with the right information. If you want to validate that, with Joy, you do have a validate function, which allows you, if my name is not an alphanumeric between 3 and 30 charts, you will have an issue. It will send you just an error, an exception in Node.js, saying that, yeah, the name field is not correctly typed or does not contain the good information. Maybe it's empty. Or something like that. So you will have a way to automatically say, I want to be sure that based on my type, this is something that you can keep and regenerate every time the API change or the contract change. And that way you are 100% sure and certain that you will work with good information and good data. Second point, okay. We know with this solution that you can reuse your code and you can reuse your contract to secure your API. I'm not really keen to have my API and my code being called knowingly when there is some bad information. Maybe a field, like maybe the authorization header is empty, or maybe it's not the right format. Maybe it's just number and I expect something else. Maybe it doesn't contain the bearer keyword or some other stuff, or maybe my body is also incorrect. You can also do that if you use AWS with the API gateway. You can easily use the same contract to define specific answer from the API gateway before it even call or forward the request to maybe your Lambda or other solution behind that. You can basically use that by default to use the API gateway from AWS to just filter every request which try to access or should access your API. And you can, with that, also use and reuse information, or at least reuse your contract to send to block a request which doesn't contain some information that could be required or should be following a specific state or specific information type. Sorry. And this way you can do both of them, and I will really recommend to do both of them because we are never 100% sure. But that way you will still have a way to use something that could be done by the business to just filter an information and block a request if it's not following the right information to your API. Yeah, with the time, it will be a bit short to show you a live demonstration of that. I will post, if you go to my GitHub account, so github.com/Sheplu, or I will also post everything on Twitter. I will show you multiple examples on how to do it. It's quite easy depending on if you use Terraform or some other technology. But I really, really encourage you to first work with your business. I think it's quite important to do so, to have everyone being aware of what's an API and how it's working. And secondly, to reuse something that you should trust as this is your source of truth. Your contract, your Swagger or OpenAPI definition should be your source of truth when working with API. And then with that, you can generate multiple ways. API gateway, for example, could be every proxy, could be in your code itself. You should be able to reuse this information to validate or not, and to have default compartment on your API, sending maybe a misconfiguration, sending pretty much everything or every information. That way, we can really start to work with the business on how you want to link both what you do and what you know as developer writing code, and what the business know about specific business, I would say, use case in one part, but also business information that you may be not aware. Especially, I'm working mainly with companies that more than 30 plus years old. So it's really hard to have a global knowledge of every possible information that could be sent back, or every type of data that could be sent back from a simple API that maybe was created like, I don't know, 15 years ago. That way, if people like play it nice, I would guess, and I would say, you can be sure that your API will always be secure, at least just on the part on data being sent from your user, from a customer, and processing this data. This will allow you to just be certain and maybe to focus on other stuff. Like it will help you to, I would say, have your every database request or query, because if you expect someone to send you, I don't know, a password, but it's not in a good format, your request won't even reach your SQL code in your project. So it could protect you from multiple parts, multiple security that could arise if you are not careful, checking and validating every input. That way you are able to validate every input. And if you also use that on the API gateway, you can just focus on, okay, my API should be called only when every parameter is already being filtered, is already being checked, and I'm almost 100% sure that it's being validated and following a good format and a good setup. So yeah. And I think I'm just on time, 45 minutes, perfect. So if you have some question, I'm available for question, or maybe if you want more specific information about it, do not hesitate.
Thank you very much, Jean. Some question around. So first, there is mostly a joke here, but is it true that in the pharmaceutical world, API means advanced pharmaceutical ingredients?
I'm not sure. I would guess Yes, so I think it will depend between multiple part of the company or stuff like that. I heard something like that was quite similar, not in Sanofi, and now I will have to dig to dig a little bit if we also use this keyword for this meeting. I didn't in the past like 6 8 months. I didn't heard that name being used that way at least. But it would be quite possible. Like we have a lot of keyword and acronym being used on a lot of topics, so it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, no. So sometimes, we had some speakers who were talking about APIs, but that was advanced pharmaceutical ingredients, and they were
Yeah.
mixing the name of the conference. So,
Yeah.
so API security was like, pharmaceutical security. So that's for the. Some question about the business, like what are your main arguments to convince the business to be interested by API security?
Yes, this one is a very good question. I would say it will really depend on the people and level of security or criticity of the solution. Um, One part, I was able to meet some people working on the business side, PO, which were also interesting on what we were doing in the engineering part. So for them, starting to work with Open API, even a bit of Postman to try and do some HTTP call, it was a way for them to understand what they were asking us. And for us engineer, it was also a way to share and show what could be some issue that could arise when working with API. It's like a way to exchange our way of working, information, and big topic that could be linked to what we do. Um, that would be one part of the answer. The second part is how to push everyone. Everyone trying to have everyone involved in that is a bit harder. But you have also to understand that in healthcare and drugs and vaccine and stuff like that, we do have a lot of security issue. I was also working in banking insurance before that, so it was the same. And the business is also a bit responsible on issue like if something wasn't tested and no one was really aware on the technical part, you cannot be sure that it will be working. So for me, this part, security part, is also linked, and Swagger and Open API is also linked to try to have the business counterpart to learn a bit more about API and also using Postman, at least just basically how to use Postman to check an API. And for me, the second part with that is how can we reuse a test done by the business or QA or someone else and to integrate that into our test. That could be a full other talk about it, but you can easily do that if you use Postman and collection. You can just export them and reuse them in your CI using Human or another technology. And that way, it helps you to show to both as a technical person, but also someone working with closely with the business, to show different mindset of how people will use an API. Because to be honest, like maybe us in the engineering world will think that if we are working with an IP address, we'll remember about IPv4, IPv6, and a short handle for both of them. Someone from the business won't be aware of that. But maybe on their part, they will know that a specific range is only available inside the company on an internal network, and you will need to process it differently. I don't know. It's just an example on the top of my head. Did I
One
answer
question
your
about this.
question?
Yes, the answer is one question about the surface attack and the depth of potential attacks. Like, how to mitigate, like very rare attacks, but that can go really deep and that can be really
Yeah.
troublemakers versus, let's say, low surface attacks that arrives often that are easy to stop, but that are
Yes.
the majority of attacks. Like, how do you mitigate the risk?
Yes, with this solution working with the business, and just as you can expect, every time we are working with API, there is some vector attack that we all think like, is my API or website using CRSF token, or can I have an issue with XSS, or do I validate this input being used in an SQL database request or query or something like that. This is the main one. For me, the main issue is, and something I want really to push to everyone, like you cannot be 100% sure. someone will find a new security issue in, I don't know, a technology you are using, a specific library or something else. So zero risk is not something that exists. You are always at risk. So for that, I would guess that the main thing that you can do when you are using API is really to be able to monitor almost everything. You should be able to monitor both type of request, maybe also time of just executing and computing the request, number of HTTP call on all endpoint, and after a few, I don't have a specific like time frame on that, but be able to monitor that and to have some reference value about usage of your API. And if you have something that go above a threshold or some request that seems to be too big in size, or maybe have some really specific characters or something like that, then you should have some monitoring that send you an alerting a monitoring link to an alerting solution to say, okay, normally your API got, I don't know, 500 requests per second. Now it's doing 10,000. Maybe there is an issue. Are you under attack or something like that? But you want to be aware. You cannot mitigate, and you cannot mitigate everything. You will have issue. You will have issue of people trying to attack you, to even just people from another team not thinking about using something or maybe using something in a bad way and just maybe DDoSing one of your service without even knowing it. So you don't have you cannot be 100% bulletproof on security. Is one part try to to push your security in everything you know. Second part would be knowing what's happening on your project and how it's being used. So monitoring is really a key if we're talking also about security.
Okay, last question. You talked about regulation, GDPR, CCPA, privacy. So how
Yep.
privacy comes into the API security landscape? Just an example. Do you implement purpose-based access control, like verifying the GDPR, CCPA purpose when an API requests the data to another application? Do you verify
Yeah.
storage retention? Do you verify PII or sensitive data at runtime? Like, what do you do on this?
Yeah. So there's multiple point. Like, first one, I was talking just before that about monitoring. First, I also do analyze everything that is being logged, just using, I would say, to simplify everything, regular expression. If I find some information like some file, nickname, I don't know, uh, identity card, passport, or some stuff like that, I also create an alerting solution. Uh, Maybe it's not 100% something that raise an issue, but I do have some keyword and name on everything that can be logged. Same, I would guess it's almost the same as what GitHub or maybe GitLab or AWS do when they do scan every public repository for secret or some other information like that. It's just basically scanning a lot of code or information based on some standard regular expression. So that would be one way. The other way about checking the access on how, or if someone is able to access something, what's the permission? I talk a bit about it on the first part of the talk, like authorization. Authentication, everyone think about, okay, I'm able to create a token or to request a token if I'm good and I provide a good login password. I could use my token to access an API. That's the authentication part. I also talk about authorization, and authorization is really, really hard to implement, or at least it will depend on your business. Like, am I myself able to have an account in production? Maybe. Am I able to do everything in production? No. So how can I implement, how can I say, and how every API should implement a way to, when I receive my token, everyone should be able to check, do I have the permission to call this HTTP, I don't know, get endpoint or post endpoint? What am I allowed to do? This is really the tricky part, as depending on your business and what you are doing, you can really spend a lot of time because you can have a lot of level. Like, what happens if you are using, I don't know, if you are handling a contract or banking information? I'm the one owning my bank account. Am I able to do every operation? I would guess yes. Is my banker able to do it? Maybe some of them, maybe not all of them. Is the manager of my banker able to have more privilege? Yes. So it's also depend on how your organization is working, what could be allowed. If you want to have an ascending or descending way to handle authorization, there's a lot of stuff. And that's always, for me, the complicated part. It's this one, not really doing an authentication. Nowadays, you can, like in 5 line, you can use a multiple tool to handle every social network login solution, or to just create a basic solution to generate a GWT token for authentication. For me, the hardest part is the authorization one, because it can be quite big and also depend on a lot of information. Like I'm working for Sanofi right now. Is I don't know, a specific manager in France able to access a specific information or do a specific action in an API in production? Maybe yes. Is the same person able to do some operation in if it's a manager in the US? Maybe not, because of regulation. It's the same topic that we heard about TikTok in the US, with part of the TikTok in the US and people in China being able maybe to access some information from US citizen. It's the same issue. And that in that case, you really need and want to have a strict boundaries and a way to almost, I would say, almost list every permission or everything that someone is able to do, which can be quite big and quite hard on a lot of topics.
Thank you very much, Jean. We reached the whole time. Thank you very much for answering the question. Really compelling presentation. And again, I invite everyone to look at your GitHub to know more for the demos and stuff that you didn't have the time to present. So we will go for a 30-minute break. We will be back at 1:15 Eastern time with a talk from Ed Olson Morgan about OAuth, OIDC, OpenID Connect, and protecting third-party credentials. So we were talking about authorization. We will continue to talk about authorization. Enjoy your break, and your next MC will be TJ. So